the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now here's your host for this week, Micah Marshall.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, I want to say welcome. My name is Micah Marshall, one of the hosts here at Student Ministry Conversations, and we are just so excited that you're tuning in, that you're listening, that you are part of the Student Ministry Conversation family. And do you know that you can find all of our stuff at studentministryconversations.org? You can find previous episodes, show notes, blog articles, all of the good stuff is there. Why? Because our goal here is to inspire and encourage you with things that you hear on this podcast. So everything from our guest notes to our notes to everything that's going on, we want to make sure that you are able to get everything that you need to be equipped to do what God has called you to do. And so we want you to check those out. We're on all those social media platforms, so please check it out. I am insanely excited today to be able to have a good friend of mine that I've been able to do some work with over the last years. Mike Kubis is here with us. And so, Mike, thank you so much for just jumping on this call with us and talking a little bit about what God has laid in your heart, because you have a great ministry. But do me a favor, tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get into youth ministry and what you're all about?
Yeah, so first off, I just want to say thank you. It's humble to be on your podcast today. I was actually looking back to when we first connected, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was in 2020 when I kind of like cold contacted you because you were starting a podcast. And I was like, I want to do this for our youth ministry. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just going to reach out to Micah and see what happens. And you were gracious enough to answer. So that's how our connection started. But great to be on the podcast with you today. For me, so things started for me actually when I was 21 years old is when I gave my life to the Lord. It was through a conversation from a guy named Josh Birchfield. I was working as a missions counselor for Keystone College up near the Scranton area. And me and Josh met in our travels in New York. And I forget exactly what I was doing at that moment, but he just was prompted by the Holy Spirit to start asking me about my faith life. And so at 21, I gave my life to the Lord. And I remember shortly after that evening, in my hotel room, I was kneeling by my bedside and I said, Lord, I'll do whatever you ask of me. Now, that's almost 11 years later, and there's a lot that has transpired in that. But I think also for me, like, even before I gave my life to the Lord, I had a passion for this generation. I remember I wanted to be a history teacher because I thought somehow being a history teacher I'd be able to make a difference in the schools and that. And nothing against like being a teacher. I know there's great teachers out there. But when I went into like my student teaching, I was like, I don't think this is
Nope.
this is not the way I thought it was going to be. But God orchestrated things in my life, and we can talk more detail if needed about that. But about a couple of years after I gave my life to the Lord, I moved to Quakertown, Pennsylvania. I got plugged into a church at Morning Star Fellowship under Pastor John and Teresa Decker. Started serving as a small group leader for kids ministry, and then I was kind of voluntold by my senior pastor to start a young adults Bible study. I always say that, and he always goes, "That's not how it went." And I'm like, "Well, from my perspective, that's
exactly how it went. That's exactly how it went. Yeah.
But I appreciate him doing that because he saw the calling on my life before I even saw it or even was willing to accept it as well. Like he saw something in me, and so started working with young adults with the Bible study, and then about a couple of years after that. There was some transition happening at the church, and he said, "Hey, would you consider coming on as our youth pastor?" I wish I could say that I said yes right away. I actually said no to him for two reasons. One, I loved what I was doing with the young adults Bible study, but also as well, I was working in the car industry, and to be honest, I was making good money, and so I'm like, I don't really want to give up that money, but for a month, the Holy Spirit kept saying, I need you to reconsider. I need you to reconsider. And then my now wife, Rachel, her and I were engaged at the time. We're probably like 4 months away from the wedding. And we're having dinner, and Rachel's like, hey, we need to have a conversation. And I'm thinking, shoot. Yeah, like this wedding's about to be broken off or whatever. And And she goes, no, she's like, I just don't want you to be mad. I don't want you feeling like I'm pressuring you. She's like, but in my time with the Lord, today, I just felt like he wanted me to tell you, like, to reconsider you saying no and say yes to taking on the youth, not the youth alive, but the being the youth pastor role at Morningstar. And I was like, well, let me tell you what God's been doing for the last month because I didn't want people to know I was wrestling with it. So it
Hmm.
was either that night or the next morning. I reached out to my senior pastor and said, "Hey, did you find someone?" And he said no. And I said, "Well, this is what God's been telling me." And for 4.5 years, I was a youth pastor at Morning Star Fellowship. And then God orchestrated some things in preparation for me to take on this role as the Youth Alive missionary for Pennsylvania and Delaware. And my role now is to serve the local churches across Pennsylvania and Delaware and encourage teens to share Jesus in their schools and in their communities, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, yeah, no, what a story, man. Getting, encountering Jesus at 21, and then walking on that journey to get where God has for you to be. In the sense of, you're working as a counselor, then you thought, oh, hey, maybe it's, the history teacher, and hey, I'm making good money at the car dealership, to like, all right, God, I'm going to surrender everything that we have. And I think there's a lot of people that listen and watch this that can relate to
Mm,
that the call of God on our life, there is a sacrifice that comes with it.
absolutely.
There is a sacrifice, and the great, like, I can't compare it to like dying for your faith or doing whatever, but in the culture that we live in 2024, walking away from money, walking away from provision,
Yeah.
and just being like, no, I'm good. Like, that's a very, it's a very real thing in today's culture.
Yeah. I mean, and something I don't always share it, but I guess I think, is a prime example of sharing what you're saying. So in that process of me saying yes to the youth pastor role, um, I was actually in a position to get a promotion at the car dealership, and I was gonna lead like 4 different dealerships because they just acquired them in our internet sales and whatever. And I'm not gonna give the amount, but I know based off commissions and that it was pretty high of what was expected
Yeah.
financially that I was gonna make. And then I remember going into my general manager's office and saying, "Hey, I know this opportunity's here." I said, "But I'm not gonna take it." And he's like, "Oh, so are you gonna stay in Quakertown here at the dealership?" And I said, "Actually, no. I'm giving you my 2 weeks." He's like, what? And I shared with him what was going on, and I don't say this to brag. I just say this. I'm thankful for what God can do and minister in moments. He just
Hmm.
looked at me. He's like, I had respect for you before, but my respect just went greater because you're doing what you believe God is calling you to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so you never
Mm.
know, like in the moment of those sacrifices, it can be difficult, it can be challenging, and you're fearful, like, what's everyone going to think of me? But you don't know what God's doing behind the background there. And still to be able to have those friendships from the dealership is really cool. So
Yeah, so man, what an incredible process of and you kind of hit it, like small group leader, young adults, children's ministry, leader. Hey, do you want to
yeah,
be a youth ministry? Nope.
nope.
Yep. Like, yep. And then here you are. So you served as a youth pastor for several years, and now
Mhm.
you're in this incredible position. Mike and I are both located in Pennsylvania, and we're only a couple hours from one another. And Mike works with all of these churches across Pennsylvania and Delaware, and he does this ministry with Youth Alive. Mike, tell our listeners or viewers a little bit about Youth Alive. Tell them a little bit about the campus missions and the heart of all of these things that are in it. And then, if you can, segue that into like why are you doing why this
Yeah.
part of youth ministry? Because there's many facets of youth ministry, but you've really chosen a different route in how you minister to the next generation.
Yeah, so to keep things pretty simple, when it comes to Youth Alive, what we're doing is helping students share Jesus. So
Mm,
we're empowering, equipping, and encouraging students to share their faith in Jesus Christ in their schools and their communities, and we do that by helping them become campus missionaries in their schools. And sometimes, and I even say this to students, sometimes we hear that title, campus missionaries, and some students can be like, "I don't want to do this." Like they think like we're gonna send them out to a foreign country right now or something like that. We're like, no, we're just sending you to your school. Let's see you be bold for for your school in Jesus. And so through that concept, with them being campus missionaries, we teach them how to have conversations and sharing their faith with something we call the Alive in Five, and it's five symbols that walk through the gospel message of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
And then we also teach them how they can start what we call youth alive movements, whether they are Bible clubs, uh, prayer huddles, prayer movements, evangelistic outreaches. Um, and the testimonies of them are great. Just to share a couple with you in a conversation, and then just even a Youth Alive movement, we do what are called 1 day trainings. So I'll
Mhm.
travel to different churches, and either one specific church will do the training, or they'll bring in other churches, and I'll teach students how to use the Alive in Five um, through conversation. And I remember one time there was this young girl that was there, and at first you can tell she's really nervous. She's like, I don't know why I'm here. And part of the reason, I found this out from her youth pastor later, part of the reason was she thought I was going to be like asking everyone, all right, are you going to be a pastor, a missionary, an evangelist afterwards? So she's like, what if I don't want to do any of that stuff? Um,
Mhm.
but as we were doing the 1 day training, she realized, like, oh, Mike's only teaching us how to actually share our faith. And when we were done with it, she's like, I can do this. And on her way home from the training, the Lord put someone, I believe, on her cross country team, like on her heart, to say, you need to go share the gospel with this student. And so, like, a week after the training, she goes and uses the Alive in Five to share the gospel with her friend. And her friend says, I want to follow Jesus. I want to give my life to Jesus. And so her and
Mhm.
her friend have been like doing, if I remember correctly, like prayer huddles and things like that, to share Jesus in their schools. And then just recently, down in the New Holland, Lancaster area, there was a student in a youth ministry that did what we call a fifth quarter. So it's
Mhm.
an outreach event that students can go to after like a big football game or soccer game, whatever that big sport is in the local area. And this was after a football game. They went to a church in the New Holland area. Over 200 students were there, and I found out like 150 students just gave their lives to Jesus last weekend.
Whoa. Wow.
Um, yeah, and
Wow.
so it's amazing what God is doing through our students. There is a hunger, there's a desire to for students to be bold in their faith, and this segues into why I do it. Like I said, I didn't give my life to Jesus till I was 21, and if you read some statistics out there, they say 94% of Christians will give their lives to Jesus somewhere in their teenage years, and 6% outside of their teenage years. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm that outlier. I'm like that
Yep.
6% there
Yep.
a little bit. But I believe God uses that because I remember growing up as a teenager, there were people who were of the Christian faith, right? In my school, but I never really knew what it meant to be a Christian, to be a Christ follower. And I think there was just an assumption because of the culture in the school that I was at,
Mhm.
and in the home, and the way the culture of the hometown was that I was in. And for me, when I share with students the importance of sharing Jesus, it's like you never want to assume, because I look back in my teenage years, not that it would have made my teenage years perfect, but if I had known Jesus when I was a teenager, it would have definitely helped some things out. In my own
Yeah.
personal life,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have tried to, like, for me, I really struggled with um, feeling loved and wanted on this earth, and so.
Mm.
Um, for me, I went looking for love in all the wrong places. My high school year and going into college, whether it was relationship after relationship, or even through um, partying and drinking, because I thought somehow that would relieve the pain that my soul was um, looking for. And for me, it's like, if we can help teenagers share their faith and help other teenagers not go to relationships after
Mhm.
relationship, or drugs or alcohol or whatever it may be, to fill that void, and know that Jesus Christ is the one that will show them what true love, hope, and purpose looks like, um, then that's a huge win for what we're doing across Penn.
Yeah, no, that's huge, man. Huge to be able to do that because I really feel like especially with teens, they like to be bold. They like to, they like to live out their belief system. And so, what I love about what you guys do with Youth Alive is you equip them and help them to be able to say, okay, yeah, you're passionate about Jesus. Yeah, you love him, and you'll go crazy for him. but this is how you share what you have.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, especially in youth ministry, and I think sometimes in church culture, we assume a lot of things. We just assume that
Yeah.
people are oh yeah, you know how to share your faith, you know how to talk to people about Jesus, and so something like the Alive for Five is very good because we need something concise and visual to be able
Yeah.
to give a generation to say, hey, like these are the things that are going to be aiding you in being able to share the gospel with your friends. And being able to have those tools, that's everything, because we can literally, it's almost, because I've seen the product. You can literally just hand it or text it to
Yeah.
someone and say, hey, here you go, like process this and walk through this. And it's so important because we need a generation that is going to share their faith. We need to continually evangelize in everything that we do. And it sounds like, this isn't just something that that you feel like you're just, doing to equip the next generation, but it sounds like this is almost like your personal heartbeat as well, is
Oh yeah.
evangelism.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think part of it, and as weird as this may sound, but follow along with me, I think at the age of 10, as like I felt this like I want to make a dent in the universe, right? But I
Yeah.
didn't know
Mhm.
what that looked like. Like again, like I thought it was going to be a history teacher. Again, nothing against history teachers, but I walked in like this isn't what I thought, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and what I get to do now, and just, people ask like, what keeps you going?
Mhm.
For me, it's when a student gets it. Like, I mean, the light bulb goes on, and they're like, not only can they do it, like they realize, oh, I can share my faith, but they're proactively going out and doing it. And it doesn't matter to them if it costs them their reputation, if it costs them, some friendships in the process and things like that. They are going to be on fire for Jesus, and see their schools, and their communities, be changed. And
Mhm.
um, something that I've been hearing over the last month or so, during these one-day trainings, is this consistency of, people hearing from God and through the Holy Spirit that there is a desire for students and a hunger, even for students and teachers in schools, to know Jesus, and that there are going to be people who are going to try to put out the fire of God, but they can't,
Mhm. Mhm.
because God's fire is always going to be there, and that's what we're hoping for. I mean, there's a million students across Pennsylvania and Delaware. Um, and I know not every single one of them knows Jesus. And so we're on a
Mhm.
mission to reach the million, and to not just reach them, but also equip them to go out and share Jesus where they're at, so that in the future, if God is calling them to be pastors, evangelists, missionaries, that they can do it now, right? Um,
Mhm.
as Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:12, don't let anyone look down upon you because of your youth, but set the example to all believers, right? And I think sometimes, uh, that can become a cliche in youth
Yeah.
ministry,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'd never want that to become a cliche to our students. I don't ever want them to hear like, oh yeah, 1 Timothy 4:12 again. Like, no, like they can set the example to all believers. They can make the, seasoned veterans of the faith like uncomfortable, especially if they're not sharing their faith, and be like, wow, if these teenagers are sharing their faith, then I need to be sharing my faith, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're also setting the example. I mean, Gen Z is now is going to be setting the example for Gen Alpha, and then Gen
Mhm.
Alpha for the other generations to come. Um, and it ultimately comes down to, uh, when you look at the life of what Joshua did, and Joshua was a great leader, and they got to the promised land and things like that. Um, but the one thing from that generation is, after they died off, there was a generation that didn't
Did
know the
not
Lord.
know. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
based off of some commentaries in history, it was a 500-year gap until King Josiah took over. And at the age of 8, he became king. At the age of 16, according to the scriptures, he started following the Lord. By the time he was 20, 21, he was tearing down all the idols and everything. And by the time he was 25 or 26, um, Second Kings said they had a Passover celebration like one has never happened in Israel.
Mm.
And so, for me personally, is I don't want to see a 500-year gap happen on
Yeah.
my watch.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and so, um, yeah, I think that's what keeps it going for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's the legacy of faithfulness that's passed on from one generation to the next, and we're held responsible for what we know, what we have, what we believe, and our responsibility is to pass that on to the next
Yeah,
generation. But I want to rewind to something that you said that is key, because you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that I remember this. So with being campus missionaries, it's not just affecting students, but teachers and faculty as well. Am I
yeah,
correct in that? Am I correct in
yeah,
that? Hearing
absolutely.
stories of teachers and students praying with faculty, staff members, teachers, janitors, and them encountering the Lord as well.
Yeah, I remember because I'm about almost 2 years into my role here, but I remember my first year, actually it was probably like my first month in, a student named Riley came up to me and her youth pastor at one of our Pendel youth events, and she's like, I got a testimony I got to share with you. And she shares with me how she was praying with a teacher because the teacher mentioned she had some hip pains and some things that are going on, and Riley's like, well, I believe in healing. Can I pray for you and pray for healing over your body? And so she prays for her teacher. They go their separate ways. And then that afternoon, her teacher comes up to her and says, hey, thanks for your prayer. I just want to let you know all the pain is gone.
Hmm.
So, so, so
Hmm.
like in
Let's
that moment,
go. Let's
right?
go.
And so you see like God moving in that. And then, something I've been saying, as I've been training the students this summer to share their faith, like I've been telling them, like, how many of you have that one teacher you're like not looking forward to this year, right? And
Hmm.
it's funny to see all the hands and the laughter, like, oh yeah, Mr. or Mrs. So and so or whatever. And I said, hey, just remember, they're not just your teacher, they're a human being as well.
Yeah.
And they have personal things going on in their lives, and you don't necessarily know what's going on. I said, but what if instead of you going into that classroom, um, being a thermometer and being like, oh man, I don't really like this teacher, what if you be a thermostat and set
Hmm.
the example there and show your love towards that teacher, or maybe have a conversation that could lead to you praying for that teacher if you find out something personal is happening. And who knows, maybe God will move in a mighty way that that teacher goes from you don't like that teacher to they're your advocate for maybe starting a Bible club or a prayer movement or something at your school because they see what Jesus has done in your personal life and ultimately maybe theirs as well.
Yeah. Well, and see, and that's what it's all about, is that the limitation on evangelism is not just youth to youth. It's just
Mhm.
not adult to adult. It's allowing that faith of a child to
Yeah,
really shine and be able to bring forth the gospel, and not just the gospel, but the healing power that we believe in, that God bestows upon us, that a miracle can happen. And so I
yeah,
absolutely love that. I love being able to hear those stories of, not just student to student, but really what we're seeing is a student being able to impact an adult, who that whole adult's life can be completely changed
amen.
by campus missionaries. So, as we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, do me a favor, Mike. Explain how people, if they want to know more information about what you do, about Youth Alive, about campus missions, where can they go? How can they contact you? And I'll put this all in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
And if you could do me a favor as well, is maybe give us some resources to say, hey, if you want to start, equipping your kids to be campus missionaries, to go into their schools and share their faith, these are a few things that would be really good. Give us some good information here.
yeah, absolutely. So on our website, we have a website called PendleYouthAlive.com.
Okay.
And on there, it will give you the 30,000-foot view of what we do. Also, on that website are some digital resources that students can use if they're looking to start Youth Alive movements or even learning more about the Alive in Five and how to sharing their faith. Also, something that me and my team do is that we will travel to different churches, and I want to just preface this isn't just based off one certain denomination. We work with all denominations because
Absolutely.
we're
Absolutely.
one team that we need to be united in. And so we go to the local church, whether it's for that specific youth ministry or if um, 4 or 5 different youth ministries want to gather, and we'll go through what we call the Alive in Five in the 5 different symbols of how to share their faith, whether it's talking about God is love, how our sin divides us from the Lord, how Jesus Christ died and paid for our sins and rose again 3 days later, how we all have to make a choice in following Jesus, and that the Holy Spirit empowers us to be bold in our faith. Um, and so, yeah, a lot of the information can be found there, PenndaleYouthAlive.com. I'm available on all social media platforms, whether Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever it may be. If you want to reach out to me via email, it's Mike@PenndaleYouthAlive.com. And we're U.S. missionaries. Me and my family, we serve as U.S. missionaries. And so we're always looking for people to help us financially, whether on a monthly basis or helping with one-time projects. We're partnering with Penndale Youth in October for the youth convention in the fall, and we'll be equipping students to become campus missionaries there. And at the end of the convention, we are giving free resources out to students, like a starter pack on here's how you get started right away so they can start on their rides home. And so, yeah, if they want to learn how to give, again, all that information is on PenndaleYouthAlive.com.
All right, awesome, man, awesome. So we'll drop all of that information in the show notes. So if anyone that listens will be able to check that out. I want to encourage you, use them as a resource. Use them as a resource. We want to make sure that, like, when we listen to these podcasts, that we're not just like, oh, this is good content that we're listening to, but how do we take that content and put it into application? So, Mike, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for taking the time this morning to be able to share and just be able to explain what you're doing. We love what you're doing. We always champion it. I know I'll see you in a couple weeks, so we'll get to hang. We'll get to hang out at our yearly event. But I appreciate it. Again, listeners, make sure you connect with Michael and all that he's doing with Youth Alive for Pennsylvania and Delaware, and make sure you check out all of our content. Again, we are on a whole website, got all of our stuff on there, studentministryconversations.org. We are also on all the socials as well, but we want to make sure that you get connected with everything that we do. But until then, be blessed. Let God continually use you, and let's minister to the youth of this generation. Again, Michael, thank you for being with us, and all the listeners. We'll catch you next time.